Today, I want to share a story, not just a story of tears or testimony, but a story of truth, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a girl and her dog. Imagine a courtroom filled with tension. A blind girl sits quietly, vulnerable and shaken. She's accused of lying, of fabricating a crime no one else witnessed. With no one to speak for her, she cries silently as doubt fills the room. But then the courtroom doors swing open. In walks her guide dog. The room freezes. This wasn't just any dog. This was her constant companion, her eyes, her protector, her living proof. The dog doesn't bark. He walks straight to her and does something no witness could ever do. He reenacts what happened. Through trained behavior, he signals fear at a certain person in the courtroom. He leads her to an object related to the incident, and suddenly the truth is no longer hidden, that is revealed, not by human words, but by loyalty, memory, and instinct. That day, a girl who could not see helped the world open its eyes. This isn't just a story about a court case. It's about the power of connection. It's about listening to what often goes unheard. It's about the truth, and how sometimes it walks in on four legs. She was young, quiet, and blind, but brave. The kind of bravery that doesn't shout, but whispers, "I will be heard." The courtroom saw her as a puzzle, a girl without sight, but claiming she saw something, or rather, knew something, that no one else could prove. She had accused someone of a serious crime, and with no video footage, no witnesses, and no physical evidence, the weight of truth seemed to rest entirely on her frail shoulders. The defense was brutal. They painted her as confused, emotionally unstable, even suggestible. Her credibility was questioned not only because of her age or disability, but because the world sometimes believes that if you can't see, you can't truly know. In that courtroom, she wasn't just fighting to be believed. She was fighting against every stereotype and shadow of doubt society had ever cast on people like her. But behind that fear was a quiet strength. She knew what had happened, and though her eyes couldn't see, her heart remembered. From the moment the trial began, the atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with unease. People whispered. The jurors looked unsure. The prosecution struggled. Every time the girl spoke, there was a hesitancy, as if the very act of believing her required a leap of faith too far for the rational mind. The defense's arguments were sharp and cold. No evidence, no witnesses, only her word. But worst of all was the silence that followed each of her statements. Not applause, not support, just silence, the kind that chips away at hope. She could feel their doubt like a fog creeping into her lungs, suffocating the truth. And when the judge looked at her with a kind but cautious expression, she knew no one in that room truly believed her. Yet she sat, dignified, hands gripping her cane, waiting, hoping that someone might shift the tide. And then came the sound of paws on marble. She had held it together as long as she could. Sitting alone at the witness stand, every question felt like a dagger, sharp, pointed, and designed not to seek truth, but to shake her. She tried to stay calm, answering each accusation with the dignity only someone used to being underestimated could muster. But eventually, the weight became too much. Her hands trembled. Her lips quivered. Her voice, once soft but steady, cracked under the pressure. The courtroom lights fell hotter, the silence heavier, the stares more piercing. Every second was a reminder. She was alone in this fight. And then, it happened. A single tear broke free, then another. Suddenly, the brave face crumbled, and the courtroom saw not just a witness, but a human being, a blind girl pleading not for pity, but for truth to be heard. She wept, not just out of fear or frustration, but out of deep heartbreak. The kind that comes when you speak your truth and are met with silence. Her sobs filled the room, echoing louder than any legal argument could. For a moment, the courtroom wasn't a battlefield of lawyers and judges. It was just a room with a crying girl and a truth no one believed. And just when all hope seemed lost, when it felt like no one would ever stand with her, the courtroom doors opened. Because her silence wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment before the truth walked in on four legs. Just as the courtroom began to settle into a heavy silence, the sound of soft footsteps echoed down the hallway. But they weren't human. The sound was rhythmic, gentle padded. Then the doors creaked open, and in walked a golden retriever. Calm, focused, and harnessed with the badge of a trained guide dog. All eyes shifted. The jurors turned. The judge leaned forward. Even the girl, her cheeks still wet with tears, raised her head as if sensing something, or someone, familiar was near. The air changed. This dog wasn't just a companion. He was her constant, her guide, the one presence in her life that never doubted her, never questioned her perception of the world, and never treated her blindness like a limitation. He walked steadily toward her, not pulled, not called. It was as though he knew he was needed, that he was walking not into a courtroom, but into a moment that would define everything. The girl whispered his name. A soft whimper came in reply. And just like that, the silence was no longer empty. It was full of meaning. This was no longer a trial with a blind girl and her word against the world. It was something else entirely now, because her eyes, in the form of a golden retriever, had just walked into the room. At first, everyone expected the dog to behave as he always had, calm, obedient, focused solely on guiding his girl. But within seconds of entering the courtroom, something changed. As he approached the defense table, the dog stiffened. His posture tensed. His head tilted sharply in one direction. His breathing quickened. He planted his feet, staring not with curiosity, but with caution. A low growl rumbled in his throat. This wasn't disobedience. This was instinct. The defense tried to laugh it off. Even the dog's confused, one attorney quipped. But the judge didn't smile, nor did the jury. They saw what was unfolding. Something honest, something unrehearsed. The kind of reaction no lawyer could train or script. The girl, now sitting upright, her tears paused, reached out. Her hand hovered in the air, waiting. The dog ignored her call, something he never did. Instead, he circled slowly, stopping directly in front of the accused. Then he barked. Not out of anger, but alarm. It was a single sound, sharp, focused, deliberate. And just like that, the courtroom changed again. The jury saw it. The prosecution saw it. Even the judge sat back, lips slightly parted in shock. This wasn't just a guide dog. This was a witness. The court had not prepared for this, for a testimony that didn't come from a human mouth, but from a living, breathing companion with no reason to lie and no agenda to serve. The guide dog, trained for safety, awareness, and memory, began moving purposefully. He approached the area where the incident was said to have occurred. He sniffed around the defendant, avoided his outstretched hand, and sat firmly in front of the girl once more, shielding her, as if remembering what had happened that night. The room was still. The prosecution looked at the dog, then at the girl. The defense stayed quiet, for once unsure of what could be said to refute what was happening in plain sight. No bark, no growl, no sudden movement. Just that quiet, deeply intelligent stillness that said more than any sworn oath could. It was as if the dog was telling the court, "I remember. I was there. She's telling the truth." For the first time during the trial, the jury didn't just hear a story. They saw it, not in images or footage, but in behavior, instinct, and loyalty. And it was undeniable. In that quiet exchange between girl and dog, something deeper was revealed. Something that no evidence could replicate and could deny, truth born from unwavering loyalty. This dog had been with her through everything. He was trained not just to lead her physically, but to sense her stress, her fear, and her safety. And in that courtroom, his instincts rose above the skepticism of the law. His movements spoke of memory. His reactions revealed trust and distrust. This wasn't about tricks or coincidence. It was about a creature who had no motive but to protect, and in doing so, he confirmed everything she had said. While others doubted her because she could not see, her dog showed them that she saw in ways they could never understand, through scent, sound, emotion, and trust. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was subtle, natural, honest. Sometimes, the most powerful testimony doesn't come from words. It comes from loyalty that cannot be faked, from behavior that cannot be coached, and from bonds that cannot be broken. In that courtroom, loyalty became truth, and the truth had finally found a way to speak, even if it spoke without a voice. In the days leading up to the trial, this had seemed like a hopeless case. A blind girl's word against someone society was more willing to believe. The girl had no wealth, no power, no platform. All she had was her story, one that came wrapped in vulnerability and risk. She didn't want attention. She didn't want sympathy. She wanted justice. But in a world where people often trust what they can see more than what they feel, her truth had no legs to stand on, until her dog walked in. Because that day, something remarkable happened. The courtroom witnessed a transformation, not just in the case, but in the hearts of those present. The jurors who had looked at the girl with polite detachment began to lean in, watching her with new eyes. The judge, once reserved and cautious, began to soften, sensing something bigger at play. This wasn't just a legal trial anymore. It was a moral one, a test of how willing we are to believe in what we cannot immediately prove. A test of how we measure truth when it doesn't come neatly packaged in statistics or signed documents, but in intuition, courage, and connection. Justice isn't only about evidence. Sometimes it's about understanding the human soul, about listening with our hearts when facts fall short. And in this case, it took the loyalty of a dog to remind an entire courtroom that truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it walks in quietly. Sometimes it sniffs the air, refuses a hand, and sits firmly in front of the person who needs it most. Sometimes truth wears a harness and fur and carries more weight than 100 testimonies. The blind girl's tears didn't win the trial. Her truth did. And that truth was never alone. It had always walked beside her, silently, faithfully, unquestioningly. Because justice isn't just about proving a fact. It's about believing a person when their soul is speaking. That day, when the gavel finally struck, it wasn't just a verdict that echoed through the courtroom. It was a reminder that justice, when blind, must also learn to listen. The accused was found guilty. The girl, once doubted and dismissed, walked out not as a victim, but as someone who stood for the truth, not alone, but with her guide dog by her side, her silent warrior, her living testimony. The courtroom had learned something no law book could teach, that truth isn't always seen with the eyes. Sometimes it's felt, sensed, and believed with something deeper. In a world that constantly demands proof, the bond between a girl and her dog proves something far greater. That loyalty can be evidence, that courage can be enough, and that the smallest voice, when paired with the strongest love, can shake the walls of doubt. Justice was served, not because the system was flawless, but because, for once, the system paused long enough to see with its heart. And as the girl and her dog walked out of the courtroom, side by side, the world behind them was just a little more awake, a little more believing, and a little more just.